The silence on the bridge of the Dominion flagship was not the absence of sound. It was the absence of certainty. Below them, Earth continued to rotate with indifferent patience, oceans shimmering under sunlight like nothing had ever touched it. No burning cities, no collapsing continents, no screams carried on planetary winds. Only life. Varix Thune's claws tightened around the edge of the tactical console. Rerun all engagement logs, he ordered. All units, all deployments, confirm destruction. The analyst hesitated. Admiral, we are not receiving absence reports either. Varix turned slowly. That is not a sentence. It is the data. A pause stretched between them, thin as wire. Then the analyst continued, voice lower now. We are not detecting destroyed units. We are not detecting active units. We are not detecting any trace that units were ever deployed beyond initial insertion vectors. Another officer stepped forward. That is impossible. Matter cannot simply stop. Varix cut in sharply. He stared at Earth again, and for the first time since the campaign began, he felt something unfamiliar crawling behind his thoughts. Not fear, not yet. Recognition of a system that no longer behaved like a system. Launch reconnaissance probes, he said. Not weapons. Observation only. A pause. Then, and prepare invasion escalation protocol. No one objected this time. That was worse. The probes entered Earth's atmosphere quietly, designed to mimic micrometeoroids. Untraceable, disposable, perfect. They descended over 3 continents simultaneously. What they saw was not war, not ruin, not resistance. It was recovery. In one city, humans were repainting buildings that had never been damaged. In another, emergency crews were dismantling strange organic residue that no longer moved. In rural zones, people were collecting broken fragments of unknown biological matter into sealed containers labeled with hazard symbols. But the most disturbing detail was not what they were doing. It was how casually they were doing it. As if this was routine. As if invasion was just weather. One probe focused on a facility buried beneath an unmarked mountain range. Subterranean, massive, structured with precision that made Krevian engineering algorithms hesitate. Inside, there were humans, engineers, scientists. Monitors lined the walls, each displaying biological schematics that matched Krevian deployment records. One screen displayed the hollow stalkers. A human voice spoke calmly. They were basically walking between frame skips. No wonder they desync under continuous observation. So light exposure breaks their timing. Continuous patterned exposure. Yeah, they hate rhythm. So we gave them jazz. Laughter echoed softly. The probe transmitted everything. On the flagship, silence deepened. They're analyzing our deployed organisms, Varix said slowly. No, a scientist replied. They're dissecting them in real time. The Dominion escalated. Orbital platforms activated. Energy arrays charged. Earth received a direct transmission. Submission OR termination. The response came 12 minutes later. You first. The invasion began. Energy beams struck Earth with surgical precision. Cities dimmed, then relit. Backup grids activated. Geothermal, microfusion, distributed redundancy systems. Every strike was answered not with panic, but rerouting. Ground units deployed next, but there were no front lines. Only encounters. A soldier stepped into a ruined highway zone. A voice came through comms. You're early. Another voice. You're underestimating re-entry friction by 7%. A third. Do you always send nightmares first, or is that just branding? No targets acquired. Only observation, then adaptation. Across Earth, Krevian monsters were no longer behaving as designed. They were being studied, rewritten. A hollow stalker stopped behaving unpredictably. A swarm fragment collapsed into controlled chemical cycles. A quiet one stopped erasing memory, and started being contained inside it. Not destroyed, solved. On the flagship, Varix finally asked, what are they doing to our weapons? A pause. They're treating them as engineering failures, the scientist said. Earth broadcast again. You're good at building things that scare people who don't understand them. We understand them. That's the problem. Final escalation began. Planetary sterilization protocols. Energy buildup filled space with pressure. Then, silence. Not peace. Expectation. Varix looked at Earth. Abort firing sequence. Shock rippled through command. Then, a human voice over internal systems. Good decision. Behind him, the display changed. Not hacked. Not broken. Rewritten. Every deployed asset marked. Status. Integrated. The fleet never fired, because every monster they had sent down had stopped being theirs. Not destroyed. Not returned. Simply understood. And once understood, no longer useful as weapons. On Earth, life continued. Engineers debated utility classifications of recovered anomalies. One glanced at a containment unit and said, "We're keeping this one, right? Yeah, it's useful. Just don't tell it what it was for." And above the planet, the Krevian Dominion learned its final lesson. It had not invaded Earth. It had delivered tools, and humanity had simply decided to keep them. The Dominion fleet did not move for a long time. Not because it could not. Because nothing in its doctrine accounted for what had just happened. Weapons were not supposed to become understood. Monsters were not supposed to become managed. And wars were never supposed to end with the enemy calmly rewriting the battlefield while still standing on it. But Earth had done exactly that. And now, Earth was looking back. The first sign that something had changed was not visible on sensors. It was visible in behavior. Krevian systems began reporting something deeply unsettling across all remaining deployed assets. Non-hostility stabilization. At first, the analysts assumed corruption in the data stream. Then it spread. Every surviving construct, every hollow stalker remnant, every fractured swarm node, every quiet one-derived cognitive fragment, was showing the same pattern. No aggression, no mission continuation, no return attempt. Just function, reassigned function, rewritten purpose. And that purpose was no longer aligned with the Dominion. On Earth, deep beneath the surface of what had once been considered unremarkable geological zones, something new was forming. It did not have a name yet. It was not a government, not a military, not even a unified organization. It was an infrastructure of understanding. Krevian technology, once designed to dominate cognition, perception, and biology, was being systematically deconstructed and reassembled by human hands. Not destroyed, not feared, repurposed. One captured hollow stalker, once a predator that existed between perceptual frames, now hovered inside a containment lattice that pulsed with rhythmic electromagnetic stabilization. A human engineer observed it carefully. "Phase skipping is still unstable," she said. Another replied, "It's reacting to emotional noise again." A third chuckled, "It doesn't like when we argue near it." The first engineer nodded. "So it learns context faster under structured social input." Silence. Then, "We're teaching it conversation." No one questioned that. Not anymore. Far above, on the Dominion flagship, Varix stood motionless as new reports arrived. "Admiral," the analyst said, voice tight, "we are detecting recursive behavioral drift in all deployed entities." Define. They are no longer functioning as weapons or wild systems. A pause. They are functioning as cooperative models. Varix slowly turned. "That is impossible. They are foreign biological constructs. They do not cooperate." Another officer hesitated before speaking. "Sir, they are cooperating with us. Indirectly." The lights of the tactical display shifted. A new map rendered itself. Not showing Earth's surface, but something beneath it. Expanding networks. Lines of communication. Clusters of hybrid systems forming across continents like neural pathways awakening inside a planetary brain. Varix stared at it. "That is not Earth infrastructure." The analyst swallowed. "No, Admiral." A pause. "It is Earth integration." A signal arrived moments later. Not from Krevian Command. Not from fleet systems. From Earth. It was not a warning. Not a demand. It was a schematic. A full system model of every Krevian deployed organism, annotated in human classification structure. Alongside it was a message. "We think we figured out your design philosophy." Varix narrowed his eyes. Another line appeared. "It's very emotional for something pretending not to have emotions." Silence spread through the bridge. "Then, you build fear like it's physics." "It isn't." A pause. "It's psychology." The Dominion responded the only way it knew how. It escalated. A second wave was authorized. Not monsters this time. Not experimental horrors. This time, the Dominion deployed something it had never used against a civilization still structurally intact. Cognitive collapse engines. They were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were mathematical distortions embedded into reality fields, designed to break pattern recognition in biological minds. To make thought itself unstable. To reduce intelligence to noise. To collapse societies from within their own reasoning structures. They were considered final stage tools. Not because they were powerful, but because nothing survived them. The engines activated in orbit. And Earth paused. Not physically, not mechanically, but socially. For approximately 12 seconds across multiple regions, human systems exhibited synchronized stillness. Then, every affected system resumed. No collapse, no breakdown, no cognitive failure. Instead, correction. On the ground, researchers observed something deeply unsettling. The cognitive collapse fields were not failing. They were being interpreted. A human linguist stared at a live feed. "This isn't inducing confusion," she said slowly. "It's introducing ambiguity patterns into language structures." A physicist replied, "That should still destabilize reasoning loops." She shook her head. "It would, if we didn't already model ambiguity as a default state." A pause. Then, softly, "We live in uncertainty." They just formalized it. Back on the Dominion fleet, alarms escalated. "This is not resistance," one analyst whispered. "This is compatibility." Varix turned sharply. "That is not possible." But the data did not agree. Every deployed system was not failing. Not breaking. Not resisting. It was integrating. And worse, it was teaching Earth how it worked. A new transmission arrived. This one was not structured like the others. It was personal. Single channel. Directed directly at Varix. He opened it. A human face appeared. No uniform. No insignia. Just a man sitting in a dimly lit room surrounded by screens filled with Krevian system architecture. The human spoke calmly. "You're starting to realize something, aren't you?" Varix said nothing. The human smiled faintly. "You didn't send monsters to destroy us." A pause. "You sent problems." Silence. "And we solve problems." The transmission flickered, then continued. "You're hollow stalkers. We turned their phase skipping into predictive logistics. Your swarm. We reprogrammed it into environmental cleanup cycles. Your quiet ones." A slight tilt of the head. "They're helping us compress redundant memory systems. Very useful for data storage efficiency." Varix's claws tightened. "That is assimilation." The human nodded. "Yes." A pause. "We prefer the term learning." The transmission ended, but the damage was already done. Not to Earth, to the Dominion, because for the first time in Krevian history, a civilization had not just survived its weapons. It had repurposed them faster than they could be deployed. The second wave was cancelled mid-launch. Not by command, not by enemy action, by system failure. Every cognitive collapse engine began returning contradictory results. Not malfunctioning, not corrupted, recontextualizing. Orbital engineers watched in horror as the engines began to map their own distortion fields into optimization loops. One technician whispered, "They're teaching it efficiency theory." Another responded, voice shaking, "It's learning." On Earth, development accelerated. What had begun as containment and analysis was evolving into something far more dangerous. For the Dominion, a collaborative intelligence network was forming. Not human alone, not alien alone, but hybrid cognition systems built from recovered Krevian constructs and human adaptive structures. A new kind of intelligence layer. One that did not distinguish between weapon and tool anymore. Only, what does it do best now? In underground labs, engineers debated classification protocols. A captured swarm node pulsed inside a containment field. "It's stabilizing," one scientist said. "That's impossible," another replied. "It's responding to structured input sequences." A pause. "It's learning grammar." Silence. Then, almost reluctantly, "It's learning us." Back on the flagship, Varix stood alone now. Most of the bridge crew had stopped speaking unless necessary. Not out of fear, out of confusion, because every assumption they had about war was dissolving in real time. Finally, Varix spoke into the silence. "Prepare final doctrine." No response. He turned slightly. "We still have sterilization capability." The analyst answered quietly, "Yes, Admiral." A pause. "But," Varix waited. The analyst continued, "They're already inside the systems we would use." Silence. Long, heavy, absolute. Then came the final transmission from Earth. It was not directed at the fleet. It was broadcast across every channel simultaneously. Across every frequency. Across every system the Dominion controlled. And it said only this: "You sent us monsters. We kept them." A pause. "Now we know how you think." Another pause. "We're done being something you can misunderstand." On Earth, deep beneath the surface, the hybrid intelligence network stabilized its first fully unified model. Not a weapon, not a defense, not even a government, just an evolving system of shared cognition built from two very different species learning, at the same time, what the other meant when it said, "survive." One engineer looked at the glowing interface of the integrated swarm construct and said quietly, "It stopped being scary a while ago." Another replied, "No." A pause. "It just stopped being theirs." Above the planet, the Dominion fleet finally began to retreat. Not because it had been defeated in battle. Not because it had lost its weapons. But because it had realized something far more uncomfortable than defeat. It had encountered a species that did not interpret invasion as an endpoint, but as input. And Earth continued to learn. Quietly, efficiently, patiently, as it always had. Because long before the Dominion arrived, humanity had already discovered the most dangerous truth in the universe. Nothing is truly a monster. Once you understand how it works. The Dominion fleet did not retreat because it had been defeated in battle. It retreated because every possible version of battle had stopped making sense. Weapons that were supposed to end civilizations were being understood faster than they could be deployed. Monsters designed to instill fear were being converted into tools, systems, even infrastructure. Entire doctrines that had defined the Krevian Dominion for centuries were collapsing under a single, unbearable realization. Earth was not resisting invasion. Earth was absorbing it. And worse, Earth was improving it. On the flagship, silence had become operational policy. Not ordered, not enforced, simply inevitable. The command bridge once filled with tactical noise now functioned like a waiting room for consequences. Varix Thun stood at the center of it all, unmoving, staring at the shifting planetary model of Earth suspended in the tactical core. It no longer looked like a target. It no longer looked like a world. It looked like a system that had started rewriting itself around foreign input. A technician finally broke the silence. "Admiral, all remaining deployed entities are no longer transmitting standard Krevian control signatures." Varix did not turn. Status. A pause. Then, "They're transmitting Earth-derived classification signals." That sentence hung in the air longer than it should have been allowed to. Another officer stepped forward. "That's not possible. We designed them to be cognitively locked." The technician shook his head. "They are not locked anymore." A pause. "They are reorganized. On Earth, deep beneath what had once been classified as a simple continental plateau, the integrated cognition network stabilized its next phase. It had no central brain, no throne of control, no singular command structure. Instead, it was distributed awareness, nodes of human cognition braided with repurposed Krevian systems. A hollow stalker instance now functioned as predictive environmental mapping. Swarm fragments had become distributed biochemical optimization systems. Quiet ones, once designed to dissolve identity, were now used to compress redundant data pathways and enhance memory efficiency. Nothing had been destroyed. Everything had been redefined. A human engineer looked at the growing network visualization and said, "We're not just adapting anymore." Another replied, "What are we doing then?" A pause. Then the first answered, "We're finishing the design work." The Dominion responded the only way it knew how. It attempted total erasure, not invasion, not engagement, not negotiation. Erasure. The final doctrine was activated across every remaining operational system. A planetary sterilization cascade. It was not meant to destroy Earth. It was meant to ensure Earth never had been. Reality-altering weapon fields activated in orbit, designed to override local space-time consistency, to erase biological coherence at a fundamental level. The fleet prepared for final discharge. And Earth did not panic. It simply observed. The first anomaly appeared in the weapon field calibration. Not failure, not distortion, recognition. The sterilization cascade began to map Earth's cognitive network, not as a target, but as a structure. Engineers on the flagship watched in horror as the system began rewriting its own targeting logic. One officer whispered, "It's learning what it's supposed to delete." Another responded, "No." A pause. "It's learning what deletion means." On Earth, the network expanded its observational reach outward. For the first time, humanity was not reacting to the Dominion. It was studying it directly. Every Krevian system still in orbit, every weapon array, every remaining command structure, all of it was being mapped. Not as threats, as designs. A scientist looked at the projection and said quietly, "They built everything like fear was the baseline assumption." Another replied, "That's why they don't understand us." A pause. "We don't build from fear. We build from problems." The sterilization cascade fired. Space bent. Reality distortion fields expanded toward Earth's atmosphere. And for the first time since the war began, Earth responded. Not with weapons, not with defense systems, but with synchronization. Across continents, underground systems activated in perfect alignment. The integrated network pulsed, and something impossible happened. The Krevian sterilization field stabilized. Not weakened, not resisted, stabilized, as if it had found equilibrium. On the flagship, alarms screamed. Field coherence locked. A technician shouted, "That's impossible." Another yelled. Varix stepped forward. "Explain." A scientist stared at the data, voice hollow. "It's not collapsing the field." A pause. "It's balancing it." Another officer leaned forward. "That's not a defensive response." The scientist nodded slowly. "No." A longer pause. "It's a compatibility response." Silence hit the bridge like gravity increasing. Earth was not surviving the sterilization cascade. It was integrating it. A new transmission arrived from Earth. It was not directed at the fleet. It was embedded inside the sterilization system itself. A human voice spoke calmly through the distortion fields. "You keep designing things like reality is something you can overwrite." A pause. "That's your mistake." Another pause. "We don't overwrite reality." A slight shift in tone. "We learn its rules faster than you change them." The sterilization cascade began to fail. Not collapse. Not reverse. Reinterpret. Every layer of reality distortion was being mapped into Earth's growing hybrid cognition model. The weapon was becoming documentation. The Dominion had built erasure. Earth had turned it into understanding. On the flagship, Varix finally spoke again. His voice was lower now. Not commanding. Not certain. "Begin withdrawal from system." No one objected. No one questioned. The order moved through the fleet like a relief no one was willing to admit they felt. But before the engines could fully disengage, a final transmission arrived. Direct. Unfiltered. From Earth. Greater than, you sent things you didn't understand. Greater than, we didn't destroy them. Greater than, we finished understanding them. A pause. Greater than, now we understand you. Silence. Greater than, you don't have monsters. Greater than, you have unfinished ideas. Another pause. Greater than, we don't fear ideas. The transmission ended, but something remained behind it. Not a threat, not a warning, a conclusion. The Dominion fleet began full withdrawal. Not due to damage, not due to defeat, but due to classification failure. Every system they had deployed had been reclassified. Every weapon had been redefined. Every monster had been repurposed. And the Dominion had no category left for what Earth had become. In orbit, Varix watched the blue world shrink behind them. He finally spoke, quietly, almost to himself. What are they? A long pause. Then the analyst answered, something that learns faster than fear travels. Another officer added, and keeps what it learns. Silence followed. Then Varix gave the only order left that still made sense. Do not return. No one questioned him, because everyone understood. Returning would not change Earth. It would only change them. On Earth, the integrated cognition network stabilized into long-term equilibrium. It did not expand further. It did not conquer. It did not broadcast. It simply continued processing what had been given to it. Monsters, weapons, systems, ideas. And it did what humanity had always done best. It made them useful. Deep in a quiet research facility, a junior engineer looked at a stabilized hollow stalker construct and said, "So, what do we call it now?" The senior engineer didn't look up. Something that works. A pause. That's enough. Far above, the Krevian Dominion fleet faded into interstellar distance. No victory songs. No triumph declarations. Only silence. And a growing understanding that would follow them for the rest of their existence. They had tried to send monsters to kill humanity. But humanity had never been waiting to fight monsters. It had been waiting to understand them. And once understood, nothing stayed a monster for long.